This is Tying It Together with Tim Boyum, a Spectrum News production. Tell you what, I'm so excited to get this podcast off the ground, and what a better way to do it than with the current governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. We are getting this week an inside look at what it's like to be a Trump. Laura Trump is the daughter-in-law to President Trump.
That's right. We're talking with Rtdnac Cook. She now stands as the record holder for the longest single space flight by a woman.
Green flag, NASCAR is back.
So how are you preparing, for a race to go 200 miles an hour?
It's a good question. But there's really no good answer to it.
It broke my heart. Part of my soul was crying.
The building is closed, but the church is open.
This is Tying It Together with Tim Boyum, a Spectrum News production, the podcast that dives into the inspiration, stories, and people behind the crazy world of North Carolina politics. A little different now. We're handling the coronavirus. When the governor basically shut down gatherings, there was lots of discussion online about what this means for churches. So this week, we're going to talk with a rabbi, an imam, and a preacher, a Christian preacher, essentially, about this, how they're handling it, what it was like when they got the news, technologies around. It's Saturday, March 14th. Governor Roy Cooper has just banned large gatherings. Hours after the ban, Raleigh Rabbi Jenny Solomon from Beth Meyer Synagogue stares at empty pews.
It is, on the one hand, so incredibly strange to be leading tefillah with a room without people. And yet I feel our connection that spans across space and time, across this building and our homes, wherever you find yourselves.
Churches, synagogues, and mosques across the state were turned upside down, forced to turn personal connections into internet connections. Rabbi Jenny Solomon's husband and fellow Rabbi Eric Solomon. So tell me about the moment you realized you weren't going to be able to have an in-person service.
This has been such a trying time on so many levels. But what I've been teaching to my people is, these difficult times. First of all, the Jewish community, if we have a PhD, summa cum laude in something, it's in struggle and in suffering in difficult times. And we know what it means to be resilient. Having said that, it happened very quick, on a dime. And, we're a congregation. We're not set up like Spectrum News with technology. We have some, and we were not, we were basic, but to really learn. So we had to just make a real spiritual shift to saying, what's important? What is safe?
فسأكتبها للذين يتقون ويؤتون الزكاة.
The Islamic Association of Raleigh welcomes nearly 3,000 people a week, more than 10,000 for important services. As part of its faith, it hosts a call to prayer 5 times a day. This is Imam Muhammad Abu Taleb. In your faith, how important is congregating in the building itself, not only just personally, but also, from a ritual perspective, etc.?
The building certainly plays an important role. The Arabic word for mosque is masjid, meaning place of prostration. And so it's a place that symbolizes community and congregation. And in that sense, not only here in Raleigh, but actually in our tradition, in the Mosque of the Prophet 1,400 years ago, that continues till now in Medina, it was a place actually where some people that were on hard financial times or, were homeless for a time would actually have a designated space in the mosque for, shelter and help getting back on their feet.
It's really kind of weird being in the building that usually has hundreds of people.
At Connect Christian Church in Concord, Executive Pastor John Cox looks at the building ban as a philosophical opportunity.
So we started talking about the building is closed, but the church is open. We actually put those signs on our upper level, lower level. You can't get in our building. Here's the number if you need assistance. But this is, in reality, maybe one of the greatest things to actually push the church outside the four walls into the community and into each other's homes.
And all three faith leaders are doing what they can, streaming services and posting Facebook messages. Rabbi Eric Solomon conducts morning prayers on his back porch.
I appreciate the comments and feedback. I'm working on, I hope you enjoy the birds in the background and hopefully no more lawn mowing in the background, at least early.
Three faith leaders maintaining hope and calming fears, focusing on prayer and people, all people, regardless of faith.
There could be multiple of these coronaviruses over our lifetimes that get into the human population.
Because we genuinely don't understand why this virus is the way that it is.
This is Tying It Together with Tim Boyum, a Spectrum News production. Boy, we have a special episode this week on a very important topic.
Yes, we do. We are talking about coronavirus, everything you need to know about the virus, everything you need to know about what's going on to develop tests and vaccines in the midst of this world pandemic.
Yeah, and a huge, and I mean huge, North Carolina connection. The world awaits a vaccine or even a therapy to help put an end to COVID-19 coronavirus. What you may not know, a big part of that work is actually happening in our own backyard. Scientists at this moment are in a secret lab in North Carolina, one of a few labs in the country desperately and feverishly searching for a solution. So this week we're going to take you inside the search for vaccine, learn more about the coronavirus and why this one is different. Picture a lab. It's windowless, airlocked, and in a secret location on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill. It's run by a scientist named Ralph Barrick, a brilliant scientist who has studied viruses for decades. Dr. Lisa Grolinsky works with him at the Gillings School of Public Health. She's part of an elite team working tirelessly for a solution. There's only a few labs in the country like the one you're working in that is doing what you're doing, right?
Yes, there aren't that many coronavirus experts in the U.S. or really around the world.
So when you get ready to go in the lab, I mean, describe sort of what you're wearing and what that's like. Because if I'm not mistaken, you all are wearing suits and respirators and everything, right?
Yes, there's a lot of gear associated with this. And luckily, we have a pretty good stockpile of that on hand right now. So there's an anteroom associated with the lab. And the first thing you do when you go in, after you sign all the appropriate paperwork, is you change out of your street clothes into a pair of scrubs and a pair of, we call them our BL3 shoes, a dedicated pair of shoes that doesn't leave the facility.
Let's back up for a minute and talk about the virus itself. While many of us keep calling this the coronavirus, that's technically not specific enough. Dr. Rachel Graham has been studying coronaviruses for almost 20 years now at UNC's Gillings School of Public Health. Coronaviruses are nothing new, right?
That's correct. There are dozen different coronaviruses, and there are actually 6 other coronaviruses that are known to infect humans.
Dr. Barrick, who's leading this effort and who you work under, has been warning of coronaviruses for a long time, right?
Yes.
So is it just the government's not paying it? I don't want to put you in a bad position here. Obviously, you're in a very important position right now. But is it just that no one's been heeding these warnings for a long time, and this frankly, was coming all along?
To a certain extent, we would agree with that. Now, this is our kind of area of expertise and focus. And so part of that is always having to justify your work and why you need money from the government. So in that sense, we were particularly invested in being able to explain why coronavirus research is important. But I think after the first highly pathogenic human coronavirus emerged with SARS, and then a second one came 10 years later with MERS, well, if that crossover event from, maybe bats to an intermediate species to people has happened twice within 10 years, it seems very probable that it's going to happen a third or potentially a fourth time.
It's time to open up.
What we're kind of seeing in North Carolina unfolding is sort of like one guy making all the decisions.
Because they are put there in order to protect the people of North Carolina.
I don't think we've seen that much in the way of overreaching particularly.
When you start treating churches differently than other businesses, I think that's when it becomes problematic.
So without further ado, the legal line, whether or not government has crossed it during this pandemic. It started in earnest last week in Michigan.
Time for our state to be opened up. We're tired of not being able to buy the things that we need, go to the hairdressers, get our hair done.
Protesters surrounding the Capitol demanding an end to stay-at-home orders, an order these protests defied, while people chanted, "Lock her up." The governor they were referring to, Gretchen Whitmer, standing by her decision.
They were in close proximity. They were touching one another. That's how COVID-19 spreads. And so the sad irony here is that the protest was that they don't like being in this stay-home order, and they may have just created a need to lengthen it.
The protests spread across the nation, including North Carolina. This was outside the North Carolina General Assembly. Ashley Smith, a mother of four from Morganton, is one of the co-founders of Reopen NC. It's a group with more than 60,000 followers now, but it started with Ashley and a few friends who were upset with Governor Roy Cooper's stay-at-home order. Walk us through how this whole Reopen NC thing sort of started and has snowballed since.
Right. So as of last Monday, myself and the two other co-founders, sort of just had a chat. We had been following our senators closely for, updates about what was going on. And at that point, we started hearing senators coming out on their Facebook pages saying, well, there's a rumor that Governor Cooper would like to extend this shutdown through June. And how do you feel about that? What do you think about that? And I was just totally floored.
The legal questions hit a fever pitch when Raleigh police responded to a tweet that said protesting is a non-essential activity. Here's Campbell Law Professor Greg Wallace. Where does government's sort of emergencies powers begin and end?
But when you're talking about these stay-at-home orders and the particular governors or mayors issuing restrictions regarding social distancing, you're really talking about something other than the federal government. You're talking about state and local governments, and they get their power from what's known as what we call the general police power. That is the power of state and local governments to act for the health, safety, welfare, morality of their people. That power is only limited by state constitutions.
UNC law professor and constitutional expert Bill Marshall largely agrees. I don't think a lot of people kind of understand where does government's emergency powers sort of begin and end?
That's a case-by-case situation, but clearly with a crisis of this magnitude where so many lives are being threatened, this is clearly the kind of instance that government has traditionally come to the fore and used its emergency powers. This has been true since the beginning of the 20th century, not just the 21st century.
Let me give you a different scenario then. Let's say they had numerous groups of 9 people that were all wearing masks, and doing what they need to do, and they were 6 feet apart, and they were on different streets, for instance. Would that be upheld, do you think, in a climate like this?
So we have a very clever protest. I mean, I think that...
I'm just trying to figure out where the limits are,
Yeah, they figure it out. We'll get 9 people and a small child, so we have 9.5. And then...
Benny, thank you.
Thank you, bud.
Stay healthy, my friend.
You too.
You've been listening to Tying It Together with Tim Boym, a Spectrum News production, produced by myself, Benny Mack, and our great digital team. Phone lines remain open for your suggestions, comments, or concerns, or maybe you just want to vent. 919-882-4251. You can reach out to me or Benny at any time by email or social media. We want to hear from you. In the meantime, be safe, be kind, and if you can, buy local. We'll talk to you next week, if not before then.